Plutonium, a second track to a bomb. This was a key demand of the French. It neutralizes Iran's stockpile of uranium refined to a concentration of 20%. It suspends enrichment above 5% for 6 months. Iran agrees to not add centrifuges to its existing cascades, but leaves intact more than 18,000 centrifuges, which it will continue to operate. Allows daily IAEA inspections at Fordow and Natanz.
These are substantial limitations which will help prevent Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Simply put, they cut off Iran's most likely paths to a bomb.
However, the deal does not require Iran to ship its current stockpile of enriched uranium out of the country, which means any enrichment pauses can be reversed. The deal received a less than ringing endorsement from key Democrats on Capitol Hill.
Let me first say that it's disappointing to me that Iran is still going to be allowed to enrich while they're talking. I would have thought that that should be a prerequisite to any kind of talks. We're not asking them to dismantle any of their centrifuges, so that's disappointing.
Iran's leadership has just issued a statement that if Congress imposes new sanctions, then the deal is off. Greg?
Jennifer Griffin in Washington. Jennifer, thanks very much. We're also learning more about the events that may have led up to the latest historic agreement. According to the Associated Press, the United States and Iran were engaged in a series of secret face-to-face talks over the course of the last year. Those talks reportedly led by 2 members of the Obama administration. Apparently, the discussions were kept hidden from America's closest allies, including Israel. Julie Pace, one of the reporters who worked on that story for the Associated Press, spoke to anchor Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday earlier this morning about the importance of those meetings.
Those are the meetings that really laid the groundwork for this agreement that we saw last night. It was in these meetings that some of the details were actually discussed between the U.S. and Iran, and that's the deal that actually was then brought to the P5 talks. And a lot of the allies were surprised in some way that this deal seemed to come together a little more quickly than maybe they expected, and that's in large part because these meetings had already happened.
Well, the AP says it was tipped off about those discussions shortly after the first meeting back in March. An historic mistake. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling this nuclear deal with Iran, while also saying that his country is not at all bound by the agreement. Leland Vittert, live in Jerusalem with more. Leland?
Greg, some very serious words and emotions flying around here in Jerusalem. Betrayal and then also abandonment here. The Israeli foreign minister has said that if the United States is going to make a deal like the one they just did, maybe Israel needs to go looking for some other allies. One of the foreign minister's key allies politically, obviously, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has made the Iranian nuclear program a centerpiece of the past 10 years of his political career. And the government here in Israel is very angry about any deal that, which in their opinion, leaves the path open for Iran to get the bomb. Prime Minister Netanyahu did not pull any punches after his cabinet meeting today.
Last night is not a historic agreement. It's a historic mistake. So Israel is not bound by this agreement. We cannot and will not allow a regime that calls for the destruction of Israel to obtain the means to achieve this goal.
And it's a very thinly veiled threat that the Israelis maintain the right to take unilateral military action, although a strike against the Iranian nuclear facilities is right at the outer edge of the envelope, not only for the Israeli Air Force, but diplomatically right now is seen as a very difficult thing to do. Israel, for its part, wants all of Iran's centrifuges disabled, also wants all of its enriched uranium taken out of the country. Best to sum it up this way: Israel's red line is the Iranian ability to have a nuclear bomb, whereas it appears the United States is okay just so long as Iran doesn't actually have a nuclear bomb. Ordinarily, Greg, these kinds of differences between close allies are hammered out in private. This very public split in terms of the worldviews between Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Obama, is certainly beginning to shake the Israeli-U.S. relationship overall. Greg?
Leland Vittert, live in Jerusalem. Leland, thanks. Our next guest to Iran 5 times for meetings on nuclear issues. He's also met with the President Rouhani this past September. Jim Walsh joins us, international security expert at MIT Security Studies Program. Jim, thanks for being with us. Let me get this straight. Here is the so-called deal, and let's put it up on the screen so our viewers can see it. Iran, and this is the most important part, gets to keep enriching uranium. It does not have to dismantle its existing 19,000 centrifuges. It does not have to disassemble any of its nuclear program. It can still produce weapons-grade uranium for a nuclear bomb within weeks. It does not have to dismantle the plutonium bomb-producing reactor near Iraq. It refuses to agree to all the inspections demanded by the IAEA to ensure compliance. And in return for all of that, the United States provides Iran with up to $7 billion in sanctions relief. Jim, this is a good deal for whom?
I think it's a good deal for the U.S. and Britain, Germany, France, all countries who signed on to it. I would challenge some of the claims there, Greg, but I think the most important thing about that list is it says what doesn't happen. It doesn't list what Iran is doing. So let's go through that list. Iran is not going to produce 20% enriched uranium. That's gone. No more. That's the top non-proliferation priority for anyone who works on this issue. The 20%, people feared if it sat on Iranian soil, might quickly be converted to higher enrichment levels at 80 or 90% and used for a bomb. That is no longer there. That is gone. They can only enrich to 3 to 5%. You can't make a nuclear weapon with 3 to 5%. What else is in this deal? They allow IAEA inspectors, International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, on a daily basis. There is no country in the world who has rules that are that intrusive for transparency. They also do not start. They just built and installed, according to IAEA, a whole bunch of advanced centrifuges. They will not start those. They will not operate those. So there's a whole list of things that in the absence of a deal, they could build more centrifuges. Right. In the absence of a deal, they could start the advanced ones. They could produce 20%.
I got you.
That deal stops that.
But look, I mean, you heard the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. He thinks the U.S. is being snookered. Leaving Iran just a few short moves away from making a nuclear bomb. And all during the next 6 months of negotiations, he thinks Tehran can inch closer and closer, perhaps in a clandestine way, to weapons capability. What do you think?
I think it's obviously not true. Now, the EU, of course, has been against this deal. He was against the deal before the deal was finished. I think he's pretty much against any deal. And this is the Likud party in Israel. It's not all of Israel. We hear different voices in Israel. But this is a deal that's supported by Americans 2-1. Polls show that Americans support this 2-1, where there are a lot of folks, Democrats and Republicans. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was national security advisor to a Democratic president, Brent Scowcroft, who is a Republican national security advisor to 2 presidents, they support the deal. This rhetoric seems increasingly troublesome and extreme. I think what Israel and the U.S. shares, neither of us want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And the question is, what's the best path to do that? And I think the 6 countries of the world, it's not just the U.S., it's France and others, think this is the way to push that off and to turn it around.
All right, Jim, last question. If the Israelis are disappointed, the Saudis would appear to be apoplectic. They're moving to Plan B, as you know, nuclear weapons of their own, likely bought from Pakistan. Then there's Egypt, there's Turkey. They're going to want to get in on this. This interim plan with Iran seems to do little to slow an escalating arms race in that region.
I hear you, Greg, and this is an area of the world I've studied a long time, and in particular I've studied proliferation cascades, which is what you're discussing, a long time. I would say this. The surest way to put pressure on those countries, on the countries that you name, where they feel pressure where they get a nuclear weapon, is if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. So the question is how to stop that. I think this deal helps prevent that and puts it on a different track. So I think that prevents, I don't want any nuclear weapons in the Middle East. I don't want any proliferation. That's what I've spent my career on. And I think the way to stop that is to keep Iran from having it. And I think this deal goes pretty far down that path on that score.
Jim Walsh, as always, great to talk to you.
Great to see you, Greg.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
At an Iranian prison because of his Christian faith. Did the Obama administration turn their backs on him? We're going to look at how the nuclear deal with Iran may affect the fight to win his freedom.